I have a question about reparations. This has been a topic that has come up because Bernie Sanders was asked the question on reparations. Do you accept reparations? And people, some African Americans, have hated his answer. Now, I've argued that his answer is the only answer you could give if you were talking about running in a general election. What's your perspective on this? I don't know if you've heard Sanders' answer. Sanders essentially boiled down to what does reparations mean, and I'm not in favor of giving everybody a check. Is that's kind of the way the answer went. But to be fair, she asked him, "Are you in favor of giving money?" He asked her, "What does it mean?" And she says, "Oh, well, what do you mean?" She says, "What does reparations mean?" And she says, "Well, money." He says, "Well, I'm not necessarily in favor of sending everybody a check." That's the way he framed it. And people are like, "Oh my God, I can't believe Sanders said he's not going to send people a check." They were pissed off at him. And I asked, "What do you expect him to say?" Now, because I'm of dual mind on this, but I'm curious about your opinion on this. A, is what he said horrible, and B, is he right? Because I'm curious. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Okay.
Well, my understanding is that Mr. Sanders may have amended his position with regard to reparations. This comes in the wake of the reality that one of his competitors, Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, has endorsed generally the concept of reparations. The fringe aspirant for the Democratic presidential nomination, I'm speaking of Marianne Williamson, the spiritual guru from Southern California, has endorsed the concept of reparation and in fact has put a dollar figure on that particular concept.
Yeah.
Apparently, there's been a breakthrough with regard to this concept of reparations amongst potential Democratic nominees, which I wholly understand, because once again, I think the catastrophe that is Mr. Trump is forcing many in the Democratic Party to think they have to do something new.
Yes.
They have to do something new, particularly if they want to energize a political base that votes against the GOP 9-1. I'm speaking of the Black American constituency.
Yeah.
Not only that, but I think that many have become more acquainted with the fact that the US government paid reparations to thousands upon thousands of Japanese Americans who were interned improperly and perhaps illegally during World War II, 1942 to 1945, that Germany has paid millions and millions of dollars in reparations to Israel, even though Israel was not in existence at the time of the crimes that were committed by Nazi Germany between 1931 and 1945. You may know that in Sugar Land, Texas, just outside of Houston, excavation recently uncovered the bodies, the bones of 95 Black American men who apparently were worked to death in the so-called convict leasing system. A state legislator in Texas is now suggesting that the families of these men who could be tracked down through DNA tests should be accorded reparations. We already know that there is an epidemic of workers in this country who are cheated out of wages, and there's a kind of neo-slavery that exists within the borders of the United States of America. There is a suggestion that these workers who have been cheated out of wages, that is to say, forced to work for free, should be accorded reparations of some sort, which means that they are on an equivalent level of the ancestors of some of us who worked for centuries without being paid.
Yeah.
So I think that the power of this kind of argument is breaking through and is influencing the conversation and the discourses that are being launched by serious presidential aspirants such as Senator Warren of Massachusetts and I believe Senator Sanders of Vermont as well.
I think this issue is radioactive. Now, what I mean by that, maybe this is my conception of what the outside world is, and that's fair enough. And I'm dual mind of this because I think both arguments are true. I think in one's case, you're absolutely right. There seems to be this breakthrough. It was like, oh my God, Donald Trump won. We need to energize the Black vote. And what can we throw to him that's real, that's significant, that tries to, get him aroused? And reparations. Hey, let's do that. Elizabeth Warren is an outlier, so she can do that because she's not going to do it to the general anyway. She's doing whatever she can. She's doing a Hail Mary. but Sanders is in a different position on this. I looked up the polling on this. Whites, because ultimately you're trying to get a white population that I always say doesn't regard this history honestly to acknowledge that history, and not just acknowledge that history, to from the standpoint of the government itself, give a clear denunciation of that history. We shouldn't have did this. This was a horrible behavior. We want to compensate people for the behavior, not to mention the work itself. But simultaneously, you're stuck with a political argument. Can that fly? Meaning, can you make that argument work? And up to this point, I think it's like 20% for reparations, or like 25%. Like the number is so low. Like in regards to the issues, in fact, it's one of the lowest issues politically of getting support behind. And when you're talking about those issues of being able to be attacked on, this is one of those issues. This thing of, James Baldwin said, nobody's trying to take your cup of coffee. Well, in this case, it looks like somebody's trying to take your cup of coffee. Am I wrong on this? Is my assessment off on this?
Well, keep in mind that just before he was assassinated in April 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., his poll ratings were probably the equivalent, if not below that, of reparations with regard to the Euro-American community. Mm-hmm. If you look at the reaction to protests against Jim Crow during the high tide of the civil rights movement, the Black freedom struggle, you would have also found many Euro-Americans who were in favor of Jim Crow and segregation. Even as we speak in Dixie, for the last 60 years, 9 out of 10 voters in the Deep South vote for the GOP across class lines. So I don't think that we should be hamstrung or have our positions shaped or dictated by that of the Euro-American majority. I think what we need to do is work to change the political environment, just like we've worked to change the political environment concerning these pro-Jim Crow sentiments. Yeah. And then we found a change in the law with the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And I think we need to do the same thing. I don't think that we should be handcuffed, if you like, by the fact that there are those in this electorate who are not necessarily progressive.
Last question. The question after this will be, if you want to say anything that I haven't necessarily asked you in the course of this interview, I always ask that because I don't want the person to leave without it. But from a political sense, looking out at the world, and you have a candidate who, well, two questions. What does reparations look like if there's no poverty? That's the first question. The second question is, when you have a candidate who's working with this idea of trying to eliminate or diminish poverty significantly, not to mention implement programs that are going to outsize help the people at the bottom of the income scale, meaning African Americans. I mean, let's be honest. It's not more whites in poverty, meaning more whites on welfare, but there's deep poverty within the pockets of African Americans. With that much benefit, meaning with that much bang for your buck, education, free public school, free education, expansion of Social Security, with those benefits that are there, don't you get more bang for your buck than trying to get through a plan that is going to be magnificently divisive? Like, is that argument right? Like, because I'm stuck with this problem of if that goes through, the moment that they try to push for a plan like that, there's going to be a backlash for that plan, in the same way that Obamacare had a backlash that the GOP was able to essentially harness in order to kind of go after the next party. But wouldn't it be, isn't that true? Like, it creates a divisive environment where you have elements and pockets of the various other races that get pissed that this takes place. Not necessarily saying they're right or fair. Fairness has nothing to do with it in this case. People feel a particular way because they feel a particular way. Like, does it create more chaos than it solves?
Well, first of all, I'd like to repeat that I don't think that we should be hamstrung by the fact that there are folks who are not too progressive. Otherwise, people like yourself and myself might still be sold on the open market.
Fair enough.
The mass support that existed for slavery in 1860. Second of all, you have people in this country who are opposed to affirmative action, opposed to the very phrase affirmative action, even though they're not really sure what it means. Yeah. But they think that is something they should oppose because they watch Fox News and they listen to Rush Limbaugh. Once again, I don't think that we should be hamstrung by ignorance. I don't think that our positions should be dictated by the ignorance of some. I think that we should boldly go forward, like our ancestors boldly went forward, and try to destroy the systems of iniquity that are persecuting us. I think that that's the only alternative. I think that's the greatest gift that not only we can give to our grandchildren, but the greatest gift we can provide to humanity as a whole.
Very cool. Gerald Horne, thank you very much, man. I'm going to